Okay, well, good morning, everybody. My name is Nicole, as the slide says, and I work in Council's Community Grants and Partnerships team. And our business is grants and partnerships, as the title might suggest. In a previous life, before coming to work for Council, I worked in the not-for-profit sector for many years, in particular for a group that was an amalgamation of about 80 different not-for-profit groups, mostly volunteer run. So I feel like I have, from that experience, a good understanding of the groups you've all come from. And one of the things that all of those groups, and I'm sure you all have in common, is that you need funding, and you're often faced with the challenge of seeking that funding and finding grants. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of the Council's grant programs, those that are most relevant to the groups in the room tonight. And then I'm going to move on and talk about a new toy that Council's got that is really going to help you find other grants, all sorts of grants, non-council grants. Okay, so Moreton Bay Council currently commit over $2 million per financial year to grants to community organisations. So that's no small amount. That's a pretty big commitment, and that funding is spread over a wide suite of funding programs. So those programs on the screen there are most of the funding programs that are directed to community groups in the region, and I'm going to talk about just 4 of those. Thanks, Minton. So I'm just going to focus on 4 of those. It'll give you an overview of 4 of those because these are the programs that you're most likely to be finding or seeking grants through Council for to support projects that you're doing. So the first one I'll talk about is Council's community grants. So this program is available for you to submit applications biannually, so that's twice per year, and there is a round open at the moment that closes on the 10th of August, and that will be assessed, grants will be awarded, and then it won't open again until next year on the 1st of February, and so that's an annual cycle. There's 2 different categories. There's community activities and community facilities, each for the amounts that are on the screen there. In the case of community facilities, you can see that the applicant does need to be providing a 25% co-contribution. So that's 25% of the project amount that you're seeking funding for. And that's a fairly typical ask in the grants world, particularly for those high value grants. For the activities grant, up to $10,000, there's no co-contribution required. And there is a funding limit over the whole financial year of $20,000. So for instance, if you were successful in achieving a community activities grant of $8,000 in one round, you would still be eligible to apply again in the next round for either category, but you couldn't achieve more than $20,000 over the full financial year. And I'll just add, for groups who perhaps have a bigger facility project. So the facility category will support facility development and planning activities. So that might be, I think in the last grant round, we funded a group to do a concept plan for a grandstand. So nothing actually got built, but there was considerable expense was required just to go through the planning stage. So that's another project that's eligible under that category. Sometimes groups are looking at a facility project that's a much bigger budget than that, perhaps up to $50,000, and Council does at the moment offer an interest-free loan program that can support those projects up to $50,000, and the maximum repayment term is 10 years. We don't get many applications for that. Obviously, a grant's more popular because you don't need to pay it back, but that extra funding is there if your project and your group are eligible to apply. The next grant I'll talk about is the local community support grant. So this is a much smaller grant, much smaller funding amount available, and it's a much more flexible grant. You can apply at any time. It doesn't ever close, but it's assessed only 4 times per year. So this grant will support, it's particularly designed to support local activities. That might be, in your case, Come Try Days or membership drives, things like that, or some other kind of celebration or activity. It can also support equipment purchases. There is a different funding limit for the 2 types of projects there, so kind of subcategories. And like the other grant, there is a maximum limit that a group can achieve over the whole financial year. So as I said, you can apply to that grant at any time. So it's really flexible. It's a much simpler application process than the previous grants that have the higher value. And it's assessed 4 times per year, and the next assessment date is the end of this month. So if you were to apply in the next couple of weeks before the 31st of July, you would know the outcome about 2 or 3 weeks after that date. Another grant that council offers, and this council's offered this grant for a long time, is annual celebrations. It's one that I think a lot of groups probably don't know about, or perhaps don't consider when they're thinking of funding activities in their clubs. It's not as high a value as the other grants, only up to $1,000 per celebration, but there are a surprising number of groups that do run activities at their clubs that are aligned with these particular celebrations, in which case you would be eligible to seek funding through this grant. So they're the 5 different celebration periods that council will support you to have activities through this grant. And those dates do bounce around a little bit from time to time. They've particularly been very bouncy over the last year through COVID. And we just found out a few weeks ago that Seniors Week, that previously was a week in August for a very long time, it's been upgraded to Seniors Month. So it's now a whole month in October. So if any of your groups are looking at having celebrations during those acknowledgement periods that do reflect the intentions of those celebrations, then I'd suggest you consider the annual celebrations grant. Like the local community support grant, it's a fairly simple application process, and the outcome is known fairly quickly. The last grant, council grant I'll mention, is individual achievement grants. And I think there's quite a lot of people here today from sporting groups, if I remember the list correctly. And this is a very, very small value grant, as you can see. Only $200 and $350 higher amounts for the Olympic and Commonwealth Games events. And this grant is unique in Council's suite of grants is insofar as it supports individual achievement. So the applicants can be and must be individuals. So this is a high volume grant program. We do get a high volume of applications for these low value grants, and it's able to support young people or people eligible in either of those categories to represent Queensland or Australia at an activity or event that they're involved in. We get a lot of applications to support young people to go to sporting events to represent Queensland or Australia, but it's not limited to sporting events. So we've also supported young people to represent Queensland in debating competitions. Some young people went to America, I think last year, to participate in the Lego Championships. Yep. That's a thing. And also dancing and the arts are equally supported. So for the youth achievement category, the applicant must be 25 years or younger, because that's the intention of that grant. And for the other category, the Olympic or Commonwealth support, there's no age limit. And the Olympic category does, I just have to read this because I always forget, it does support the summer, winter, youth and Paralympic Games, and also the Special Olympic World Games. So they're the equivalent events under the Olympic banner. So that one's been a bit impacted this year as well. Okay, so a few general considerations when applying for a council grant, and this also applies to a lot of other grants, and that's who can apply, who can and can't apply. So for all of council grants, incorporated community groups are eligible to apply, with the exception of the grant that is for individuals. For some of our grants, the other next 4 groups of organisations may be able to apply. So that includes churches, kindergartens, schools. So you need to read the guidelines to be sure that you are an eligible applicant under the grant that you're applying for. So not every council grant will be eligible for kindergartens to apply for instance, or schools. And then those last three groups with the Red Cross are not eligible under any council grant program. For unincorporated groups, while they are not eligible to apply themselves, they are able to be sponsored by an incorporated group. So it doesn't exclude them from seeking council grants. It just means that they can't be the applicant in their own right. And we do get quite a small number of auspiced applications every year, and that's fine. Okay, and what can't be funded? So this is also really key information that you'll find in the guidelines, and it changes for every grant. But the list on the screen now is the types of things that typically will not be funded by a council grant and fairly typically won't be funded by any other grant either. So that's things like your ongoing operational costs, so your electricity bill, your rent, things like that, that you need to come up with the resources to be able to pay those expenses for your group to survive. Gifts, prizes, cash, alcohol, software, SaaS, software as a service. So subscription software is considered an ongoing expense for your organisation. Emergency repairs, also considered something that your organisation really should be having the funding and resources to meet yourselves. And also land on an ineligible entity. So that's applicable to the facility category. So if you're undertaking some kind of facility improvement to your venue or premises and you don't own the venue, then that would not be eligible. Okay, so grants can be pretty stressful for groups, but there's no reason why it needs to be a stressful experience if you're ready and prepared, and that's a really easy thing to do, to be grant ready. So we strongly recommend that you keep some key documents on your desktop so that they're ready, right, sitting there ready for you to attach to a grant application when you come to the point of preparing and submitting a grant. The last thing you really want to be wasting time with when you're focusing on a grant application is getting your audited financials, getting your certificate of insurance, getting letters of support, and in the case of a facility activity, you'll need planning documents. You'll also need quotes for expenses that you're putting in your grant. I mean, they will be different for every grant, of course, but a lot of these documents are going to be the same, and they're the kind of documents that your organisation is required to renew every year anyway. So I strongly recommend whoever in your organisation, whoever the person or people are that are likely to be preparing these grant applications, keep these key documents in a grant ready folder on your desktop, so you don't need to run around contacting different people in your group to find these things at the last minute, because that's going to be out of your control if somebody else has got them potentially. And the other thing that you really need to understand yourself, and this is something that the grant provider won't be able to help you with or provide advice about, is your organisation's governance structure. So most of you are probably incorporated organisations. You're probably incorporated under the Incorporated Associations Act, but there are other acts that groups can be incorporated under, and that's fine also. But you need to know that. You need to know which act you're incorporated under. You do need to know your ABN, and you need to know your legal title, because you need to be applying under that legal title. So sometimes, particularly in sporting groups, the sporting groups are called the Fuzzy Bears, or something really fun and a great title, but it's actually not your legal title. It might be part of your legal title, but sometimes the legal title can be quite different. So you do need to be sure that you are applying under the legal name of your entity and not under that casual name that perhaps you're more familiar with. That's really important. And so you can't, the grant provider can give you only so much help, particularly with the guidelines, but we can't tell you what your incorporation status is. If you're unsure and for some reason nobody else in your organisation knows, you can check that through the Office of Fair Trading and the central register. So there's a few different registers where you can put in your organisation name or your ABN and find that information. But you shouldn't have to do that. You should know it. Okay, and so that diagram is how your applications are assessed, how council grants are assessed, and it's very similar to how most grant programs are assessed. If in the first instance your application is assessed for eligibility, so that assessment will check whether or not you are an eligible entity to apply under the grant and whether the project you're seeking funding for is an eligible project. So there's two aspects to eligibility. If you're not eligible for both of those, your application can't progress to further stages. So that's the information you really need to be sure you have from the guidelines before you start to prepare an application, because if you're not either an eligible entity applicant or your project is not eligible under the grant program, then that's not the grant for you. So you really don't want to be wasting your time on the wrong grant, because that's what will happen when you get to here. It won't go any further. So after it is assessed for eligibility, if it is eligible in both instances there, it will progress on to be assessed for merit, where it will be assessed against criteria, which are also in the guidelines. So one of the key criteria for council's community grants and other community grants as well is the broader community benefit of the project that you're seeking funding for. Then those outcomes of the merit assessment go on to be moderated, so that in the competitive grant round they're basically assessed side by side to see the value of the project. The recommendations are endorsed, and then the outcome is published. It's published on council's website, and also each applicant, regardless of whether they're successful or unsuccessful, are contacted by email to advise them of the outcome. And the outcome for each grant program is different depending on the grant. That information is council's website. Okay, so last thing about grants is Moreton Bay Regional Council, lots of other councils and lots of other funding providers use Smarty Grants as our grants management platform. It's accessed via council's website or the funding provider's website. Once you get into Smarty Grants, you need to create an account for your organisation to do your grant business. So we strongly recommend that you use a generic email address in your organisation that other people can use, and that you choose a password that's easy to remember, and that you share that information with other people in your organisation. It can get difficult if people have chosen to use their private email addresses, then they leave the group, and then other people in the organisation are left to finalise that grant or continue on with the grant, and then they can't access that information, or they need to go to a fair bit of trouble to change passwords and things like that. So it is a collaborative platform. That means different people in your organisation can be completing different parts of the grant application, which is a really good thing. It means that perhaps the treasurer might jump in and do the budget, someone else might write the project description, someone else might proofread it. So that's a really good reason to share those login details so that you can also share the work. So Smarty Grants will manage the whole life cycle of your grant, so right from application to acquittal. So all of your grant-related documents will be accessed and submitted via Smarty Grants. So you will be going back into that system through the whole life cycle of your grant. So that's another reason to share the login details. And you can also go back into the system even long after your grant's acquitted. So we often get phone calls from groups who aren't sure if previous grants have been acquitted, and if the acquittals are outstanding, you're not eligible to apply for further funding from council. And that's a fairly typical arrangement from funding providers. So you can log into Smarty Grants and see whether or not that acquittal has been submitted, because it'll be in your funding history in Smarty Grants. You can also phone us, but that information is there in Smarty Grants. So it is a really powerful and a powerful resource. Which is why we use it. Okay, but what about other grants? Great question. So council a few months ago invested in a great new tool / toy called Funding Finder. It's accessed via council's website, and essentially it's a subscription service that council pays for on behalf of community organisations and residents in the region. And it allows you free access to a comprehensive database of grants and funding opportunities that are curated for groups and applicants in this region. So it's a massive database. Council grants will pop up there if you put in the right criteria. And it has a lot of functionality that makes it really, really easy for groups to find suitable grants. So previous to Funding Finder, it was pretty hard work to search for grants. You'd need a lot of time. You'd really need to know where to go. And even then, you may not, every chance you'd miss some grants that were suitable for your group. It would involve going to multiple different government websites, knowing who different funding providers were and philanthropic groups were, And generally that's just not information or time that community groups have. So this is a really, really good tool, and we're really keen to see as many groups as possible start using this and register with it so that you're really getting the benefits of finding grants for your group. So that's what, when you log through Council's website, that's the front page of Funding Finder. These different buttons down here link through to different types of resources, including videos and information on how to prepare your grants and also how to optimize your search functions. And the yellow button here in the middle allows you to register and also set up a profile and set up your favorites. So we'll just click through now and have a look at. So that's one of the resources that I just pointed out that explains how to approach your grant seeking. These are some of the videos that talk about how to prepare your grant, how to optimize your search functions, and how to approach different aspects of preparing your application. And this is one of those videos which is about optimizing your search function, which I think is worth watching.
Finding funding is usually the hard part, but we've made it simple for you not just find, but also manage the alert to funding for your programs as they become available. Here's how it works. Simply toggle between community and business grants to make sure you're looking in the right sector. If you're a registered business, you'll be looking under business grants. If you're not a registered business, but you're a not-for-profit, community or volunteer group, toggle to the community space. Now use the search filter drop-downs to refine the grants that relate to your project. Punch in a keyword if you want to refine your results even further. Make sure you save the grants that match the objectives of your project into your favourites by checking the start. Now you can head to My Grant Space to view and manage the funding you've saved. You'll find that you can keep track of the amount you're seeking, where you're up to in the grant writing process, record notes and prioritise critical grants. If there are changes that are made public to any grants saved in your favourites list, you'll receive an email alert detailing what the change is. Now head to My Account, where you can easily set up email alerts directly to your inbox about relevant funding as it becomes available. The more options you tick, the more you get. Make sure you view the remaining videos on this site so you can become strategic about the grants you're about to apply for, as well as the grants that you can map out into the future. Write compelling applications by utilising the resources on the site to give you some key tips and tricks. We wish you all the best with your grant funding endeavours and good luck into the future.
Okay, so that's just showing you how easy it is to set some, different preferences in your profile and also set up email alerts so that you're not needing to jump into this platform all the time. You can wait for it to give you an email alert that a particular grant is coming up or about to open or about to close. But you don't need to register. You can certainly search without registering if you're not sure if it's going to be something that you're interested in or you're just curious. So you can jump in and do a search. You can put in a few criteria and bring up a buffer of, it'll probably be quite a large buffer of grants. You can select favourites even in that feature. So if you're selecting a favourite, you'd be ticking these buttons here. So this one has been favourited. And then you might be searching through something like 60 or 80 grants and you might favourite 8 of them. And then you'll come back and look at the next list. Thanks, Linton, which will show you just the ones that you've selected at favourite, and will show you a bit more information about them. You can pop into any one of those and it will give you a brief overview of the guidelines. And it will also indicate when, maybe it's in the previous screen. Can you just go back one, Linton? Yes. See how it'll also indicate whether the program's open or not. And if it's not open, I think it says coming soon or something like that, or just closed. So there's like a traffic light system there to alert you when when the programs are open. So that's a really good feature, because sometimes particular grant programs only come up once a year. Sometimes they come up in a certain time in the political cycle, and sometimes they're one-off programs. So that's really useful information. And then as you go on, if you do register and you go on to populate your funding history, this chart will also populate with different data, which which probably is very satisfying if you put in a few grants to see the numbers click up there. Okay, and so that's going back to the landing page that you land on when you click through Council's website, and that's the registration button there. And that's our contact details. So I do have a list of Council's grant programs that you're welcome to take if you're interested. We will also email that to the people who are joining us on live stream. Otherwise, all of the information about Council's grants are on Council's website. Any questions?
Doesn't the website you supplied having a reminder once we register?
When grants are opening and closing?
Yeah.
It doesn't have a reminder system, but the dates are listed there on the website. So at the moment, if you were to go onto Council's website, you'd see all the grants that I've spoken about, plus more, and you'll see the date they're opening, the date they're closing, the assessment period, the notification period, so all that key information, which is different for each grant. It's all on the website, but no, it won't send you a reminder.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. However, Council does, our department does issue a newsletter, monthly Sport and Rec newsletter. It's just, yep. So we do put information in that newsletter about grants that are coming up or about to close. So a lot of the groups here I know are registered to receive that newsletter. If you're not, you definitely can register through Council's website. So that's a once a month newsletter that will include information about Council grants, opening, closing, new grants, that kind of thing, grants information sessions.
The individual grants, are they for members of groups? They're obviously in the council area, but do the individuals have to live in the council area?
Yes, they do. It's
They
the
do.
residents of Moreton Bay Regional Council.
Yep.
Yes.
Thank
I
you.
should have said that. Thank you.
So let's say I've been successful and got a grant, and my grant was for 20 chairs. I've received my money. I've gone out and I'm at Bunnings and I buy 10 chairs and 5 tables. What happens with the acquittal process?
Yep, that's a great question. Do I need to repeat the question?
No.
Oh, okay. That's a really good question, and it's not an uncommon situation for all sorts of reasons, and that's probably the most common reason. Prices change, you get there and something's not, you can't buy as many as you thought, someone gave you some, that kind of thing. So you have signed a contract with Council when you signed your funding agreement, agreeing to spend your money on the approved project. If the approved project said 20 chairs, and that's all, then that's what you need to spend the money on. If you can't do that, you need to contact Council and say, oh, gee, we actually don't need 20. We realise we only need 10, but gee, we could buy some tables. So that's would 99% of the time be approved as a change, and you'd be able to go ahead and do that. However, if your approved project had been barbecue furniture or something like that, something a bit more general that may have included chairs or tables, or then that would be no change. So you do need to be very clear about what the approved project was. So most of the time, these little changes are within the approved project. So very occasionally something changes along the journey and the group isn't able to expend the money on the approved project, and they do contact us to spend it on something quite different. So that is a different situation where we would need to go back and probably reassess that application, or the funds would need to be repaid and you would apply to a different grant for that funding for that different project. So sometimes it may not even be eligible under that grant that you were funded under. So in instances, council does need to be contacted about that change. And when you come to do the acquittal, you would be acquitting against the changed purchase. So you would be acquitting against 10 chairs and 10 tables, and not 20 chairs.
If I register for the Smarty grants now, will it show our club's past history of grants, or will it only start from when I register?
If you're using the same registration details, it will.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
So if you're using the same login details, you'll see all of your history, all of your previous funding history with Moreton Bay Council and any other funding providers that you're using Smarty grants for.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or?
It's easy, isn't it? No questions. One more thing I might just add. Sorry, sir, I'll come back to you. Go ahead.
That website, does it include the state government and federal government funding?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. If applicants in the Moreton Bay Region Council are eligible to apply. So if it was a federal government grant and the applicant must be a local government area in Western Australia, then it won't be there because that database is curated for this region. Yeah, yeah. I was just going to add that sometimes groups feel a little bit overwhelmed by grant seeking and also preparing grant applications to the point of engaging a grant writer or someone specialised to prepare their applications, and that's totally fine if groups want to do that. However, you know, no funder wants to fund. Every funder wants to fund a good project, not a good application. So you're not judged on the quality of your writing or anything like that, but you do need to make it clear. So the people reading your application need to understand what you're asking for. So it just needs to be succinct and accurate. If the grant application process is so overwhelming that it's a barrier to groups applying, then we're doing something wrong, because that's certainly not the intention of council, to make it a difficult process for groups in the region. It's not meant to be hard. Yeah. But I do get it that if you're not doing it very often, then it's just unfamiliar. Thank you.